Hello and welcome to the Pharma Forum podcast. I'm Eloise McLennan. I am Pharma Forum's deep dive editor. I am joined today, hot off the plane, well, not quite hot off the plane, but returning from JP Morgan.
Hot off the three-day weekend following
Three-day weekend. I have with me Jonah Comstock, our editor-in-chief, who we threw into one of the hottest events in healthcare, kicking off the year. Jonah, welcome.
Yep. Thanks, Eloise. Good to be here.
So, kicking things off, from the outside, we watched JP Morgan unfold. There were a couple of things that really stood out for an outsider's perspective as to what was going on. And we had brain health, AI, there were lots of M&A deals, but most importantly, the biggest thing happening at JP Morgan was the weather. Tell us what the weather was like. I've heard it was glorious.
It was the best ever. It was so sunny. I kind of walk everywhere anyway because it's so hard to get an Uber or a Lyft during JP Morgan. But this year I actually enjoyed walking everywhere and didn't get soaking wet in between meetings.
And in between those walks were, of course, sessions from some of the best and brightest throughout pharma and life sciences. Can you tell us what was your initial impressions?
Yeah. I would say overall, one of the main reasons you go to JP Morgan is to try to get an idea of what the deal-making environment is going to be like for the coming year, which of course nobody really knows, but people try to predict based on the headwinds. And there was a lot of cautious optimism this year, based partly on the fact that a couple of big deals were announced right before the show, and partly on the fact that there are some positive headwinds. Two big ones being upcoming patent cliffs mean that some big pharmas have really no choice but to make some big acquisitions this year. And we've been saying that for a few years, but the patent cliffs keep getting closer. So they're all sort of happening between, I think it's 2025 and 2028. So we're in it now. So pharma companies have got to make acquisitions. And the other trend being, we'll talk more about the Trump administration, but one of the less ambiguous outcomes of the new administration is a friendlier FTC to pharma. That's the Federal Trade Commission, and of course, they have a lot of say over what mergers you can and can't make that involve U.S. companies. And look, even if the new FTC commissioner isn't friendly to pharma, which all accounts he probably is, he'll still be friendlier than Lena Khan, who was kind of historically harsh.
So, and it's particularly interesting because we've had such an extended period, sort of post-pandemic, where mergers and acquisitions seemed to drop off quite a lot. You had the big peaks where everybody was working together to get vaccines out, and then it really went into a bit of a spiral after that. So does it seem like things are picking up a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism about it. The question is, of course, and then when you zoom in, what kind of deals are we talking about? In the recent years, when there's been less money at play, a lot of that money has been spent acquiring early stage companies because it's high risk, high reward, but you can get more kind of an outsized effect on your budget for spending less money. But when there's more money to spend, it's more on later stage, lower risk stuff. And when you do invest in the early stage stuff, there's a sense of, and this is what I heard from several people on stage, that it's like fewer deals, but they're worth more, which creates kind of a have and have not dynamic where, there's a lot of money going into the space, but can you personally get any of it? Maybe not, if you're a small biotech.
There's optimism. There's always optimism. So you talked a little bit about the administration, and of course, one of the hot names on the ticket this year was departing First Lady Jill Biden. We are currently recording. It is the day after Donald Trump has taken office for the second time. And obviously, with any transition of government, of regulators, there is going to be some uncertainty. But this is quite a significant shift in attitudes towards pharma, towards healthcare, towards regulation. So what was the response from attendees?
Yeah. Well, if I had to summarize the response, I asked this question in a lot of the interviews that I did, and it was asked on stage several times. What is going to be the effect of the incoming administration? And I would say there's two. The answers tended to be, I would say, charitably, you could call it non-committal. Less charitably, you could say evasive. there's two reasons for that. One is actual uncertainty. Donald Trump says a lot of things and does a lot of things, and there's some correlation between those two things, but not a lot. So, what he's actually going to do on a range of issues is kind of an open question. We learned that from his first term. But then the other piece is nobody wants to be too critical of an incoming Trump administration because Trump tends to take those things personally. So, I mean, nobody said this. One media person named this. Allison from Stat did it on stage. She said something about knowing who butters your bread. But when she said that, it occurred to me, people are being a bit taciturn because they want to have a good relationship with the incoming administration and they have high hopes. So with that preamble, some of the things folks are hoping are going to happen. I don't think anyone's counting on a full-scale repeal of the IRA, given what happened in Trump's first term when he tried to repeal the ACA. The drug provisions in the IRA are popular, and it would be a mistake for the Trump administration to try to repeal it fully, and I think everyone kind of agrees on that. But there's a lot of optimism that there might be some reforms to the IRA, especially the pill penalty that says that small molecules have a shorter period of time before negotiation than biologics. And farmers really focused a lot of their energy on sort of like maybe trying to advance some of these common sense reforms to make the law work a little better and do a little less damage to pharma's bottom line planning.
And just focusing on the IRA very quickly, you spoke to Catherine Owen Adams from Acadia about the incoming administration, and she had quite a lot to say, and we'll hear from her in just a moment. But another piece that comes up is the advancements in brain and neuro health, which we hadn't seen quite a lot. So can we just touch upon how much of that we saw? Because that was a big topic this year that wasn't perhaps there last year.
Yeah, well, for the last several years, people have been talking a lot about neuro as an up-and-coming space. There's a few things that need to kind of pan out for it to really go from promising to to real, I don't know if blockbuster is the right word, but, a really strong kind of area for investment. And I kind of think we're still in that space, but just more and more people are looking more closely at that space and seeing that there's money to be made there. I think some of the drama around Alzheimer's that has been playing out the last 2 years has sort of calmed down. And now it's really just about the data, waiting to really see someone make a significant sort of reduction in symptoms for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or some of the other neuro diseases. And Catherine, who you'll hear the interview with, that was a really interesting one because they're working on specific symptoms of some of these neurological disorders that not only are there not really a lot of treatments for, but people aren't even aware of necessarily. And actually, after the camera stopped rolling, and I wish this had been in the interview, she told me that they've partnered with Ryan Reynolds on a public awareness campaign just to get the word out that there are these symptoms like hallucinations associated with Parkinson's disease. So I thought that was super interesting.
Right, so let's hear from Catherine herself, Catherine Owen Adams from Acadia.
Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief at Pharma Forum. I'm here at JP Morgan, and I'm joined by Catherine Owen Adams, the CEO of Acadia Pharmaceuticals. We're going to talk a little bit about Acadia and about the neurospace more broadly. Thanks so much for meeting with me this morning.
Absolutely, pleasure.
It's been an exciting couple of years in neuro, especially around Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, as we've kind of developed more understanding of the biomarkers that drive these diseases and help us understand them. So, taking a step back from your work, and I'm sure including your work, what do you see as kind of the big, most exciting research trends in the neurospace going into this year?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up really the point that I find most exciting, which is the use of biomarkers now in neuro, and we're seeing more and more of that in clinical trials. And I think the importance of that is a couple of things. First of all is ensuring that we have the right patient in the right clinical trial with the specific pathophysiology that we're trying to test, and making that clinical trial population more homogeneous. The second is, as we move towards commercialization, depending on how that product is approved and whether the biomarker is sort of a approval with it, is the payer space. And I think as we look at global healthcare and the value proposition that we're trying to drive, having a more specific population that we can talk to payers about that might be identified with a biomarker is a really important advancement in terms of innovation in the medical space.
You mentioned some exciting things in the pipeline that you're going to be talking about this week. Can you share any of those?
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about our 2 later stage products coming through the pipeline. The first is ACP-204, which is a next generation 5-HT2A inverse agonist. And it's in clinical trials right now for Alzheimer's disease psychosis. And what we're going to be announcing tomorrow is an additional clinical trial in Lewy body disease psychosis, which we're very excited about. There's a lot of clinical focus on alpha-synuclein, and which we believe is the pathophysiology behind Lewy body dementia. And so we're going to have a second trial moving into Lewy body dementia with psychosis. So that's exciting. The other thing that we're going to be sharing is the Prader-Willi product that we have in the pipeline. It's called ACP-101. It's intranasal carbetocin, and it's for use in patients that have Prader-Willi for hyperphagia, for the treatment of hyperphagia. And that clinical trial is currently in phase 3. It's a global trial, and we are going to be finishing recruiting this year. And so we're really excited to share that we'll see the top line results of that trial very early next year. So that for us is a huge milestone.
And would you classify that as another rare?
Yes.
Play? Yeah.
So Prader-Willi affects about 8,000 to 10,000 patients in the US. And so it's a slightly bigger population than Rett syndrome.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of political headwinds. I'm really interested in how folks are looking at the new administration and what might happen. And I know, especially for rare disease, there's a lot of unique considerations around the IRA. And so how do you think, as you're developing your pipeline, you said, you've got a strong balance sheet. How do you think about gauging for whatever might happen politically in the next 4 years?
So I think as pharma, we are used to working with whatever administration is in the White House, and we look forward to continuing those discussions and deliberations with the new administration. I think for me, what's important is a couple of things. As you rightly said, the IRA is the biggest, discussion point that we're going to be continuing with this new administration. For us in Acadia, the pill penalty, or the small pill penalty of the 9 versus 13 is a very important aspect that we need to continue to educate on. I've been up on the Hill with Bio, as well as, individually with Bristol in a prior life, and educating senators about the impact of the 9 versus 13 is very interesting. They don't really understand that having a policy which targets small molecules versus large molecules can have a big impact on innovation. And why it's important for Acadia is because most of the molecules that we're using for neuro and beyond Acadia are small molecules because they cross the blood-brain barrier, and large molecules generally don't. And so having this 9 versus 13, which essentially penalizes small molecule development, is a real problem for developing drugs that are going to make advancements for patients with Alzheimer's disease or with Parkinson's disease or depression. So again, educating people about that is really important. And beyond that, there's other parts of the IRA which are important for us to focus on as a small company. The Orphan Cures Act is part of it, the various sort of tax considerations around R&D development. So we continue to want to have dialogue and ensure that the new administration is fully informed of the impact of some of these specifics.
Before we go, I want to just ask a little bit about this focus you have on treating these psychosis symptoms, hallucination symptoms. My grandfather died from Parkinson's a number of years ago, and at the time, my memory is that there was just really nothing to be done about the hallucinations. Right. They treated his pain symptoms, as the doctor said, just kind of roll with it. So, how has that evolved, and why is it important to treat those symptoms as part of the larger treatment paradigm in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and in these rare diseases?
Yeah, no, let's unpack that a little bit. So you're not alone. Most families don't really understand that hallucinations and delusions are associated with Parkinson's disease, but we now know that about 50% of Parkinson's patients will actually have that during their disease progression. And I don't know if you remember with your grandfather, but it can have a huge impact on the quality of life of the family, and especially the family dynamic with the caregiver. So if your loved one sees things, hears things that you don't see, they can also start thinking things about you. They can focus on money. They can focus on other parts of your relationship and start saying things that aren't true, or that they believe are true but aren't. And it's a very disturbing situation. I'm also going through it with my mother and my father. So it's really debilitating for the patient, but also the family. And so the launch of Nuplazid in 2016 is the first and only FDA-approved product. remains very exciting. The issue is that we need to keep the awareness levels high, both with the caregivers, but also with the physician community. And what we're seeing is that we need to invest in that through, unbranded education, through direct consumer education, because doctors themselves don't necessarily educate all the time, the families. And so keeping that awareness level high, making sure people understand we're the first and only approved product. The other thing that's really important, Jonah, is that, doctors are using off-label antipsychotics for these patients to treat the hallucinations and delusions. And we now have real-world evidence to show that we have a mortality benefit versus those products using Nuplazid. And I think, for me, that's a really important point that we need to continue to get out there. So we have 5 years now of real-world evidence in very large thousands of patient populations showing that you should treat these patients with an approved product and not an off-label product. And there's a mortality benefit associated with that.
Just to wrap up, I mean, this conference is always about looking ahead to the rest of the year and what are we expecting, the big trends, the big stories to be in 2025. Yeah. So what are some things you're kind of excited about this year?
I think as an industry as a whole, excited about the reinvigoration of the M&A space, and today's deal for J&J with an exciting sort of focus on neuro for us as well. I think continuing for us to grow commercially, grow strategically through M&A is something that I'm looking at specifically. And in terms of the science, for me, biomarkers, as we've already discussed, new chemical entities coming through for neuropsych, and having a real look at the rare space and ensuring that we're looking at other potential areas for us to invest in is what I'm looking forward to. So yeah, lots of good things ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. It's been a really pleasure chatting with you.
And you, thank you so much.
That was Catherine Owen Adams from Acadia. Jonah, it was a very interesting interview. As you were saying, she's talking a lot about that idea of the IRA and the small molecule versus biologics and the penalization that small molecules seem to be having with the IRA. So can you talk a little bit more about what's going on around the IRA? And there's also been talk of PBM reform, which I know you're itching to talk about.
Yeah, well, I think those two things go hand in hand because and the situation with the IRA is largely what it was last year. The pharma companies have come to terms with the fact that it's here. They're, adjusting their strategies in order to weather it, but they would still like to see some reforms to some of the more egregious parts of it, and then they see the pill penalty as maybe the top of that list. There really does seem to be a lot of coordination about the talking points on the IRA. I heard a lot of the same things. It might not be coordination, it might just be agreement, but either way, it amounts to the same. And as a part of that, there's a definite shift in the approach of pharma to these drug pricing conversations to really draw attention to the things that are driving up the cost of drugs that aren't really pharma's fault. And PBMs are, pharmacy benefit managers are really at the top of that list, along with Medicare 340B reform, which is a program that's designed to help hospitals spend less on drugs to treat lower income populations, but is written in a way with loopholes that you could drive a truck through. And the hospitals basically use those discounts to buy all their drugs, including ones that aren't intended for those populations at all. That's a vast oversimplification. And I think we have a whole podcast about 340B if you want to get a little more in the weeds. But when I say they're shifting that focus, the pharma commissioned a report from an independent group, I think it was Berkeley, to really get at like how much of each dollar spent on a drug goes to people who have nothing to do with developing or making the drug. And they found it was 50%, and they broke that down into PBMs and B and a few other things, and including like interference with the programs that are supposed to, with the pharma companies' programs that are supposed to get drugs to lower income populations. So I think pharma learned a lot of lessons from the IRA. One of them was that they didn't really have a good public face around these things, and they didn't have a good lobbying apparatus. And so you can see really taking steps to correct that, and then to really be in the right place and be saying the right things as the new administration comes in.
And speaking of learning from what we've seen over the past few years, cell therapy, cell and gene therapy is really starting to actually come into its own. It not just being that hypothetical, the promise of cell and gene therapy is going to be great for patients down the road. We're actually starting to see a lot more progress now. So how was the discussion around cell therapy?
Yeah, it's really interesting. At a conference like this, you really hear a lot from the folks who are saying, like, talking about making investments in cell and gene therapies, right? And it's a space where the potential is like undeniable, but you have, there's a lot of barriers, and I've talked about that a lot in terms of like infrastructure and execution. And then there's been some kind of question marks about how it's going to be paid for. And so I think some pharma companies have been a bit skittish about getting into something where the business model isn't proven out, even if the science is. But now we're at the point where those things are starting to be proven enough that not everyone, but a lot of people want a piece of that pie as they see that it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the market. Gilead Sciences is really kind of, they got out in front in terms of the big pharmas buying Kite when they did, and they've really committed to being sort of a leader in cell therapy. But I think we're starting to see, more and more other companies want to, at least have their toes in that as it advances.
And one of the most exciting things that I've seen is the natural killer cells, the NK cells. And you were fortunate to speak to Paul Hastings from, is it NKarta or NKarta? I can never tell when I've only seen the name written down.
I think it's NKarta, like the old encyclopedia software.
And he's working on natural killer cells and cell therapy. So let's hear a little bit from him, and we'll loop back around and discuss cell therapy a bit more. Enjoy.
It's day 2 of JP Morgan, and I'm sitting with Paul Hastings, the CEO of NKarta. Thanks for talking with me today, Paul.
Thank you, Jonah.
So, for folks who don't know NKarta, tell me just the quick elevator pitch of what you guys do.
Yes, we are a cell therapy company developing natural killer cells in the field of autoimmune diseases like lupus and scleroderma, myasthenia gravis. We're in the clinic with in 2 different clinical trials. One is a lupus nephritis trial, and the other is a basket study that includes many of those other indications I just mentioned.
Cool. So this is very new stuff. I know it was just a couple of years ago this study came out of a German researcher that said, these cell therapy that we've been using for cancer might work in lupus, might work in autoimmune.
Yes.
And so you guys are working on that, but you're doing it with NK cells.
That's right.
Why NK cells instead of T cells?
So NK cells are kind of handmade for autoimmune disease. They tend to go in and work very quickly. What you need in autoimmune disease is a rapid B cell depletion and a rapid reset so the good B cells come back. You probably don't need the months and months of expansion that happen with a CAR T, where the T cells keep expanding. What probably is working for the patients with T cells is the rapid reduction of the B cells and the quick repletion of good B cells. You could probably do that with an NK cell. Why would that be better? Well, because the NK cells on a cell-by-cell basis are more potent than T cells, so you might get better depletion. We don't need the lymphodepletion that goes with CAR T cells, which is cyclophosphamide, which is an agent that lupus patients and other autoimmune patients get anyway. So we're adding our cells to what is already standard of care versus adding another chemotherapeutic agent. And since these are chronic diseases, not cancer, people are not dying from these diseases. Sometimes they do, but it's more of a chronic illness. You probably want to be more careful with the kind of preconditioning you give and not set them up for toxicities from that preconditioning. You also don't need to apheresis the patient, take their blood and make cells. Our cells are off the shelf. We can take your NK cells from a healthy donor and make our NKX019 product so that when the patient shows up to the clinic, we have the cells already. We're not spending weeks manufacturing them.
It's allogeneic.
It's allogeneic off the shelf. That's right.
So you mentioned you've got several assets in the pipeline. How far along are you, and what does this coming year look like for you?
Yeah. So this year we're going to have data in both of these studies. Now it's phase 1/2 data that we'll have. It'll be in both the lupus nephritis trial, but also in the basket study where it's myositis, vasculitis, and scleroderma. We also have 2 investigator-sponsored trials. One of them is in systemic lupus, and the other one is in myasthenia gravis. And so there may be information coming from those trials as well. Those trials are managed and run by the investigators. So we have all these multiple shots on goal where we may have some data for. So we're very much looking forward to seeing how these cells work in all these different patient types, which ones we will prioritize once we discover which ones respond the best and which ones we move forward into the next phase of development.
Yeah, but you're pretty confident that you're onto something here with the overall.
What is necessary for these patients is B cell depletion. If we're confident that NK cells should work, as well as T cells, with a better safety profile, with more convenience, and with more safety, and we're pretty excited about that.
How are you finding the kind of funding environment for a company like yours? Are you getting a lot of interest and a lot of excitement? Is it getting harder, getting easier?
Yeah. At this time last year, we had some pretty fascinating B cell depletion data, which made people pay a lot of attention to us as we started to go into this disease state. We were able to raise money right after that. So we raised over $200 million. So we now ended the last quarter with over $405 million. So that money takes us into late 2027. So we don't need to raise money right now.
Okay.
So we're in a good place. But
when you do, you'll have more data. Hopefully.
When we do, we'll have more data, exactly, and we'll have more value.
Hopefully an augur of things to come. But last year, we did have a couple of big deals announced at JP Morgan, and then and that didn't really seem to presage a lot of deals throughout the year. So you kind of never know.
You never know. Yeah. So companies get bought. You don't sell them. If you have something that's interesting to another company or a bigger company that they're looking for, they will look for you. And so if the innovation that we've all done leads to bigger companies taking a look at us saying, we'd like to have that technology, more deals will happen, whether they be licensing or acquisitions.
Well, let's talk about that in the context of cell therapy in particular, because it's certainly a field where a ton of innovation is happening.
Yep.
And it's being driven by small companies, biotechs, and startups.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Clearly the big pharmas are interested. How interested? What are they interested in? I mean, do you think there's going to be a moment where, there's an acquisition spree for cell therapy assets? Is it going to be more gradual?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I could predict what kind of environment's going to be here, but what I will say is a large company like Gilead, who bought an innovative company like Kite, has taken what Kite did and improved upon that. And they're probably what I would consider the premier large pharma that's able to deliver cell therapy, an autologous cell therapy, and continue to make that better and partner with others to make, partnership with Arcellx, where they're working on another autologous cell therapy. So other big companies see that and go, there's value there. Right?
Yeah.
So BMS is in this field, and Novartis is in this field, and Genentech is in this field. So there are plenty of big companies that are in it. Will they choose a cell therapy over another technology, a bispecific antibody, a T-cell engager? See what happens with the data.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And it does seem like a pharma company would be interested in allogeneic if the data was good. Because it looks better into their model.
It looks more like a drug than a cell therapy, right? So that's the nice thing about an NK cell. It's kind of like giving an antibody. It's off the shelf. It's allogeneic, as you said, off the shelf. So we manufacture it. We have a manufacturing facility that makes it here. So when that product arrives in the institution where they're going to treat the patient, or the clinic, or the infusion center, it's a vial ready to give. It's a cryopreserved vial, but you have to do that with some drugs anyway. So it looks more like what they're used to.
Any other big picture thoughts about the industry right now?
I think the pace of research today and the pace of innovation is a little bit like the pace of what's going on in AI. It's exponential, and there's a lot of cool stuff happening and a lot of cool science. So the question is going to be, is there enough money to fund all this stuff? And is there enough money to in science, you have to fail to succeed. You do an experiment and it doesn't always work. That's not a bad thing in science, but you have to have the capital to get through the failures to have the successes.
Right.
So I'm hoping that we're in that environment.
Yeah, and we'll see. There's a few more unknowns, right?
Just a few.
Rates and things like that.
Just a few.
Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and I'll be looking forward to seeing that data when it comes out.
Thank you, John. We appreciate it.
So alongside cell therapy, which is a huge, huge development and continues to astound me on a daily basis, one of the other big stories to come out from JP Morgan was China and the amount of developments that are coming from China at the moment. And considering that there are many questions surrounding the nation in the US, particularly around the TikTok ban and around the Trump administration talking about, I suppose, more tariffs on Chinese imports, what was the reaction to the number of announcements and the size of announcements coming out from China?
Yeah, it was just one of those things that just kept coming up. Everybody was talking about China, and I think it's because it's a change. So a few years ago, there were a lot of biotechs in China, but they called them Me Too's or Me Also's. They were looking at things that other companies had done, American, European companies, and just kind of creating maybe a slightly improved iteration or a cheaper version. China was seen as a place, you could go to do a cheaper trial. But now people are really saying that they're seeing real innovation coming out of China, including in the cell therapy space. And a lot of Chinese folks went to America, studied here, got their PhDs or other places. They've really just kind of revitalized that space at home. So that's kind of exciting, and people, want to look everywhere for deals, right? When you're a competitive deal-making environment, you do want to look at places where the prices are lower, and the prices in China are lower right now. And that may over time even out, but it's a good opportunity to pick up a cheap asset that might turn out to be really, positive and powerful. So there's a lot of excitement about China. Of course, weighing against that is the possibility that the government might stop them from doing business in China via the Biosecure Act or something similar. But I think what we've seen with like TikTok is any indication that the Trump administration is not going to, well, we'll see. I suspect they're going to be a bit softer on China, and I suspect that pharma knows that and is anticipating it.
It'd be very interesting to see. We talk so much about data in this space at the moment, and how we need to create usable, actionable data from the raw data sets that we get, and having data from an entire nation of a diverse population where we have different diseases that we can now study. It's a really interesting area that'll be really exciting to watch develop over the coming years, particularly as you said that we've got such great minds coming up with new ideas. That's only going to hopefully benefit global research as a whole. Speaking of data, it's always a huge talking point at any conference that you go to at the moment. It's data, it's AI. Now, you spoke to Phil Johnson from Evidation, who's looking at real-world data and real-world evidence, which is slowly but surely becoming an expected standard for getting things through approval. So can you talk a little bit about that real-world data and real-world evidence as well?
Yeah, there's a ton of data in healthcare, but it's not very good. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. A lot of the big data in healthcare wasn't designed for research purposes. So if you take data out of the electronic health record, that was designed to help doctors track one particular person's treatment. The notes are complete to the extent that they thought things were important to write down. If you look at the data from clinical trials, that data is, from past clinical trials. For one thing, it's extremely controlled by privacy controls. And for another thing, again, it was collected to purpose and their specific focus. And then claims data and population level data, tends to be also very broad and incomplete. Any kind of big data that you have easy access to is just not very good, especially for the more granular purpose. And what we've learned about AI, and this hasn't changed with the advent of generative AI, if anything, it's only intensified, is that you need good data to create good models and create good predictions. And so there's a real hunger for that. And there's a few different approaches to correcting this issue and finding this data. There are companies, like in previous years, I spent a lot of time with Komodo Health. I didn't actually make it to their event this year, but they have an approach that involves sort of aggregating all those sources together and cleaning them up and improving that data. Evidation's approach is really about sidestepping a lot of that and going right to the customers and creating, a database that's collected for the purpose of research directly from the participants who opt in, with a lot of transparency. But I would say just overall, like AI is becoming more and more table stakes, and that's just making data more and more important, and good data more and more important. There's a real hunger for it, and there's a lot of companies looking for ways to offer it up. And of course, there's always that clash with privacy. So, I think in the interview, Phil talks about how so much pharma data is de-identified and how that actually creates a real problem for being able to use it in all the ways that you'd like to be able to use it. So.
Well, before we dive into the AI of it all, the big topic, let's hear from Phil. So here's Phil Johnson from Evidation.
It's day 2 of JP Morgan, and I'm joined by Phil Johnson, the new-ish Chief Commercial Officer at Evidation.
That's right, 4 months in.
Yeah. So for the folks who don't know Evidation, maybe just a quick explanation of what you guys do, and then we can sort of dig in a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was founded a little over 10 years ago with the idea that, hey, the best way to help people live healthier, longer lives is to reward them for making healthy choices. Generally, no one celebrates when you hit your step goal or you make healthier choices. And so a really awesome group of founders developed an app that people would connect their wearables to, track a lot of their health data as they made healthy choices or got better sleep or took more steps or even decided to participate in research. They got rewards, and those rewards could be converted to money for themselves, or they could contribute that to research. So that's the foundation of Evidation. It's now 10 years later, it's 5 million people who've connected their wearables to our platform, and we're still rewarding people for making healthy choices.
It's interesting because you can look at it from both sides, right? That's the patient-facing, consumer-facing side. But then on the back end, what that gives you is this tremendous amount of data, and then you can do things with that.
Yeah, well, we think differently about it, that it's still those people's data. We're their custodians and stewards of their data. And so we build a lot on trying to make sure that data is really well protected and private, and everything that they do is consented. And then really it's their opportunity. We're almost like the middleman. Hey, if your data can be used to accelerate research in women's health, in obesity, in Parkinson's disease, would you like to be a part of that? Because your unique lifestyle makeup and sometimes your genetic or genomic profile is exactly what these people need to figure out whether a drug can help them with their disorder or their disease. And so we find that upwards of 90% of our members are excited about that. Not to mention they do also get rewarded for it.
Yeah. So that's super interesting. Before we go too much further, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and how you came across Evidation and what made you want to move here.
Yeah, so ironically, I've known Evidation for a long time. I was at Amazon Web Services, where I built the healthcare and life science commercial team, and Evidation was one of our customers.
Okay, of course.
So I had somebody else covering Evidation. It was an AKA achievement at the time, actually, on all my reporting dashboards. So I got to know Evidation from afar, but had an incredible time at Amazon, and it led me to actually one of my other customers, Tempus AI. They went public last year, and I joined Tempus in 2020 during the pandemic. But I had a very strong relationship with their whole C-suite. Eric Lefkowski, who's their founder, he was the founder of Groupon, founded Tempus after his wife got breast cancer. And his whole position was, if we can use data to figure out where we should go, the best way to go for dinner tonight, surely we should be able to use data to pick a great treatment option for my wife. And that option didn't exist. And so he built a company to basically generate data and then analyze data to give back to clinicians to make healthy choices, to make therapeutic choices that were specific to the patient. And so I worked there for 4 years helping build their real world data business. And so I've been immersed in cancer data, drug discovery using real world data for the last 4 years. And, Evidation had actually been reaching out for a while, and I wasn't super interested, to be honest, because I just thought it was all kind of like a CRO is what I had in my head. And I was really wrong. I spent those years at Tempus, and they were great years. We really grew the business, which was fun. But all throughout those years, I was just getting from pharma, hey, this is great data, but how do I go and talk to this patient? Hey, this patient is perfect for our trial, perfect for this therapeutic. It could save their life. But real world data, the whole industry is like fundamentally flawed in that all the data is de-identified to protect patients. But then those patients who could benefit, we can't contact them because we don't know who they are.
Right.
And that's because none of the real world data companies are direct to patient. They all go through the institution, or they all go through the doctor. And Evidation is direct to patient. And so the light bulb for me clicked that I went, they are not getting approvals fast enough. They're designing trials that don't work. They're not getting drugs into patients' hands. The data they're using is not representative. And Evidation, because they're direct to patient, can solve all of those issues that I've been hearing about. And so I reached back out to them once I connected the dots. I was like, we really got to talk. Then I became super impressed with the leadership team, Deb and Leslie and Christine. And so Then it became kind of smooth from there. But I was very sold on the problem that Evidation can solve for drug developers.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly what I was going to ask about next. Is you mentioned earlier that you think there's a lot of buzz and a lot of talk about real world evidence, but you has a different approach.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've lived with these drug developers and epidemiologists and data scientists, as well as those who are in clinical development. And one, the data is messy and the data has so much missingness, and there's no mechanism to solve it because none of these real data companies can talk to patients.
Yeah, they can't even go back to where they got the data. They can't even check that electronic health record and see why it's fragmented.
Even very few of them even are truly connected to the EHR to have the real-time updates that are necessary. And so that limits what real-world data can do for the drug developers. The other thing that's interesting is that although healthcare data is like gigantic, like 30% of the world's data volume is healthcare data. Every pharma company says they don't have data. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's that no one has access to it. And the way that at least in America, the way that our healthcare system is set up, there is no way of breaking down those silos. It's not that people have bad intentions, it's just the structure in the system resists sharing.
So you have to do an end run around the system entirely and just go to the patients.
So instead of going to 100 hospital systems, you have to go to 5 million. It's not fun. It's hard. It's expensive. And that's why no one does it. And that was not Evidation's, I think, original design, by the way. I think we find ourselves in this position where we are uniquely connected to all these different people who can help solve some of these problems that drug developers are having because they don't have data.
Right. Because the other piece is what you said at the beginning. You've created an incentive for people to give that data, and not just an altruistic incentive, although it sounds like that is a big part of it too.
It's both.
Yeah.
It really is both. I do think that the rewards are what get them in the door, but I think it's been proven that the real value is that they're contributing data to something that makes real impact. But remember, we are also providing personalized recommendations back to our members. So they are getting like real-time, personalized, customized recommendations, whether that could be an education piece, that could be someone with sleep apnea who doesn't know they have sleep apnea, but because they've connected their Oura Ring, we can tell that their sleep disturbances are so significant that we're going to send an at-home sleep diagnostic test to them. Like we can do so much for our members. So they don't just stay just for the money or the research. We actually are helping them make healthier choices, which I think is the fundamental mission of the company.
So as a data company, you are sort of also front and center, ground zero for everything that's been happening with AI over the last few years. I mean,
we are.
You've got to keep up with that, I assume.
Yes,
how has that kind of changed what you do? How are you future-proofing as the nature of AI changes so fast?
Yeah, I think that, AI is exciting. It's fun. It's going to be transformative for healthcare. I think that the lowering of low-cost compute has opened it up to everybody. I know that well because I was at AWS. I was dealing with that explosive infrastructure needs. But I also think that relevant data is critical for AI to really take off in drug discovery. So I'll give you obesity, for example. Right now, none of these companies have molecular data on people who are taking Ozempic or Zepbound or any other weight management intervention. So they don't know the changes in biology. They just know people are losing weight. Their mental health seems to be getting better. Their substance abuse seems to be getting better. Some people's liver function seems to be getting better. Cardiovascular health seems to be getting better, but we actually don't know why. So in order to do that, you've got to have enough data that's specific pre-treatment and post-treatment in the hands of these teams. They're building incredible generative AI teams at all these big pharma companies, but they don't have data.
Yeah, they don't have the right data.
They don't have the right data to train these large language models. And so I'm not sure if we're going to be trying to build the most sophisticated algorithm that exists in drug discovery. We are going to build some simple ones that can build some correlative data, causality. We can do some early detection, that's for sure, with our wearable data. But really, we want to get the data in the hands of these armies of data scientists to start really building these large language models so that we can learn about these diseases faster and then hopefully create more drugs that apply to the patients faster.
Yeah. And that's kind of the double-edged sword of using more synthetic data and being able to replace costly trials with algorithms is huge benefit. But if the data's not there, if it's not perfect,
You're just going to get further and further away from actual truth and actual results that are meaningful.
That's right. Well, and the hope is that generative AI cannot help us treat disease, but it can help prevent disease. That would be the hope. So if you want to do that, then you have to have data on people before they become patients. Like our whole healthcare system is like, sick care system, right? They enter into the EHR and claims data world when they get sick, but they lived this whole life before that where the disease was progressing and they didn't know it. And so I loved Evidation's approach of building relationships with people, not patients. So now I've got wearable data, potentially EHR data, all kinds of patient-reported outcome data previous to you getting sick. If I could put that data in the hands of Eli Lilly and Amgen and Pfizer and Novartis, now we can start to build therapeutics, potentially just lifestyle changes, but we can build things that can help either detect disease really, really early or prevent disease, which we're being asked to do quite a bit now. We're a little bit surprised at how much in obesity, I'll give you specifically, there is a strong desire amongst these large pharma companies to prevent obesity, which is ironic. You wouldn't think that.
Cynically, you would think. Now that they have a blockbuster treatment for it, they want as many people get it as possible.
Exactly.
But they can't keep up with the demand.
Well, and I think they know that between childhood obesity and adult obesity, the market's large enough. But there's a whole other side to this, that there are people who are approaching obesity or right on the verge of obesity. And there are things that can be done to either slow down that progression or stop that progression. How do you find those people?
Yeah.
You can't find them in the medical system because they're not patients yet. And so there's a lot of pharma companies interested in building algorithms actually for early detection for obesity. They need us because they need that kind of data. So again, I think generative AI is going to be incredible, but you have to have someone who's really good at data generation, and then the harmony, the harmonization, the normalization, the structuring, the storage, the delivery, all the really boring stuff. We're really good at that.
Yeah.
So they need us, and together then we can make the.
That's really interesting. And the notion that, there's just no visibility on healthy people in the healthcare system because it's a sick care system, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's unfortunate, but I do think you'll find, my belief is that in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to find some very unlikely players helping the healthcare industry make advancements because they didn't build relations with people when they became patients. They had relations with them before, and they're not going to be what you think. It'll be unlikely folks who, for whatever reason, were collecting wearable data and discovered that their wearable data that they were extracting through whatever app is the key to understanding the life patterns and the quality of life metrics.
It's all in whatever different health records you were at when you were a kid, and then when you moved, and then when you moved again. And even if you had one doctor your whole life, it would be very spotty data. And so the notion that, all of this has been happening, but only in the last, you're generous 20 years.
That's right.
So what will it look like when we've been collecting data long enough that we capture an entire life, and what can you do with that?
That's right. Yeah, I worked with Najat when I was at Tempest. She was at J&J, and we did quite a few research projects around longitudinal data for various cancer types. And again, the struggle was, and if you look across therapeutic areas, really, I struggle with migraines. That's not in any EHR, and it's not in any claims data that you could find on me. So even though I have access to all that data and I can give it to you, say an expert, you would never know. And so you're going to have to find a way to passively but continuously collect longitudinal data on people to really help them arrive at health.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that everyone thinks through the lens of EHR, maybe molecular data, claims data, that's real world data. And that is fundamentally limited. And so we're trying to break that mindset because we think there's so much more insight available into these other modalities. Not that we want to get away with it, get rid of them. We just want to include them in that whole context and then put that in the hands of people who can really.
Awesome. Well, very exciting stuff. Be interested to see what comes next. And it's really great to make the connection and to meet you, Phil.
Absolutely. It's great to meet you, Jonah.
Have a great show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, that was Phil Johnson from Evidation. He is a great interview, if nothing else. That man knows about data. He's had a fantastic and fascinating career progression from Amazon to now Evidation, looking at different sides of data and different ways that it can be used.
Yeah, absolutely. AI more generally, it definitely was a big discussion point at the conference. The last couple of years, there's been this sort of like tension between, AI is really important, but also we don't want to be part of the AI hype machine. We want to talk about like what we really mean when we say AI. We want to talk about like how we're actually using specific models. Another kind of nice bon mot from this press panel that they do at the end of the Informa Biotech Showcase was one of the journalists said, just substitute in software for AI and see if this makes any sense or sounds like news, because it's such an undefined space. But really, I think what we see just more and more is that like everyone is using AI. You have to, they're using it on many levels, from using ChatGPT in an administrative way like any other industry is, to these much more advanced, complex deployments in drug development and drug discovery. And yeah, there's a big market for companies that are going to enable that. NVIDIA has had a larger and larger presence at JPM the last few years. They're really kind of trying to drive their healthcare stuff, and they're starting to talk about physical AI, which is like robotics. So like, we've always had like robot surgeons, but they haven't been powered by AI. It's more like a remote. So yeah, that's
they're going to have proper robot doctors.
I mean, they have a division they're supporting some projects, I believe it is, that are kind of focused on that.
Well, one of the last interviews that we have for you today was a really interesting discussion with Grove AI. So we hear a lot about how AI can be used in communications, a lot to do with marketing and creating copy for platforms, for different uses, for patient-facing materials. But one thing that I rarely hear about, particularly in the healthcare sector, is audio AI. Audio AI is something of an unheard of in our sector, but Grove AI has been really powering on creating audio to benefit patients and the healthcare sector in general.
Yeah, this is a really interesting company. This wasn't even on my slate of interviews. It kind of got added at the last minute by a PR person that I have a close relationship with. She was like, you've got to talk to these people. And it's just a couple of young kids out of school that discovered a problem in the clinical trial, like CRO space, basically. And they discovered it from the patient perspective. One of the founders was trying to get into a clinical trial, and she just found it was very hard to get anyone on the phone to explain to her what the requirements were, how to get signed up. Eventually they sent her a PDF document that was just, very long and unwieldy. And so she kind of got together with some of her, I want to say classmates, but, acquaintances. And they very quickly built up this AI system that uses a generative model, like a ChatGPT type large language model, to answer people's questions about the clinical trial and get them enrolled and signed up and try to address any barriers they might have. The English-speaking agent is named Grace. I guess the Spanish-speaking one is named Javier. But they talk on the phone. So you just call a phone number, and it's not like it pretends it's a human. But apparently it's very easy to talk to and very easy to use, and can just kind of answer most of any questions anybody has. And it's been just a runaway success. All of these CROs have kind of adopted it overnight.
Well, let's hear from them directly. Here is Tran Lee and Sohit Gavaganti from Grove AI.
I'm at the Grove AI headquarters with the Grove AI team. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Tran. I'm here with my co-founder, Sohit. Happy to talk about the company, but maybe a quick introduction. Grove started as a personal mission for both Sohit and myself. I am a patient with chronic conditions. I tried to enroll into clinical trials as a care option and found it to be a really difficult process. So went to Sohit here and said, we have to do something about this.
Yeah, and on my side, I got into clinical trials by working directly at Stanford Department of Medicine, where I was working on the clinical trial search engine for doctors there to help them match patients better to trials, and was really able to see the pains across all the stakeholders, the doctors, the patients, and then the research coordinators in between really getting sandwiched. So went to train and said, we're computer scientists by training, and we can definitely find a better way to do this. So we thought, what if we could build the world's most advanced AI clinical research agent in Grace? And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, so this is a situation where you were able to kind of bring new technology to bear on a very old problem very quickly, right? And what Shira was telling me that there's a huge response from the industry once you did to show this to people, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think we were thinking about what if we made this agent that could help any participant enroll in any trial, speaking any language, and just immediately when you pick up the phone, someone's there to help you. And we made an early prototype using all our knowledge as computer scientists and from our past work. We showed it to executives and they loved it. They took the call with us and they spent time with us and they flew us out to their headquarters so we could, do the integrations and the implementations, and things got moving super quickly. And that's when we knew that the response from the industry showed there was value to what we were doing.
So many AI agents that people are working on are either chatbots or they're video. But you guys, it's an audio product. It calls people on the phone. And tell me about that decision and why that works for this population.
Yeah, I think we tried text, email, voice, everything, but I think there's something about healthcare that we saw while running all those interactions. To date, we've run over 75,000 interactions with patients. We just saw that something about discussing healthcare problems, people just really preferred voice. And this works especially well in like the older populations where they prefer to talk to someone. And that's why we just believe voice is the best solution for this.
So I assume it's powered by sort of GenAI. How do you make sure it doesn't steer people wrong, tell them wrong information about the trial or about, the procedures, things like that?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time engineering our product to make sure it can handle the complexities of the trial. We make sure everything is grounded. Before we release an agent, we manually test it hundreds of times. You run it through automated QA testing another 100 times. Our customers probably test it another 100 times after that. And any time it's in production, every single call is monitored. We get metrics, and if anything ever goes wrong, we're on top of it immediately. We get a ping on Slack, and we'll fix it almost immediately. So we're always testing and making sure things are going well.
Give me an idea of how much of a, labor saver this is, because CROs they're overburdened. They don't have time to have long phone conversations with every potential participant in a clinical trial. How big is your team, and how many humans do you actually need to support Craze?
Yeah, so our team right now is, we started with the founding team, so myself and Anthony, who also was an engineer at Stanford Med. It was 3 of us building the product. Recently just brought on Evan, who was our friend, a clinical research coordinator at Stanford, who knows this problem and works with us on the operations side. So currently it's a 4-person operations team supporting hundreds of thousands of participant interactions. Just to tell you, for example, one of our customers, they had a change in their trial and they needed to contact thousands of participants in less than a week. And so they pinged us and they're like, can you guys make this new agent with these new changes in the clinical trial that we need to make? And can you contact this list of 10,000 participants? And we did it immediately in less than a week. And to give you a context, that would take months to train people, to flip all the workflows in order to be able to do over again. And that's really the speed that we're bringing into clinical trials and bringing treatments to patients faster.
Awesome. Well, I know you guys have another meeting to get to, an exciting pharma meeting. So thank you so much for giving me the time. Any final thoughts, anything you want to share or emphasize that you're especially excited about?
Yeah, I think this is only the beginning. We still have so much more that we have to do in this industry. And we're so excited to work with leaders across the industry to make that happen. Awesome. Thank you so much.
That was Tranley and Sohit Ganaganti from Grove AI talking about a really interesting, innovative idea involving audio AI. Now, we've spoken a lot about the different trends and big talking points that you saw at JP Morgan. What were your biggest takeaways? Coming back, it's been a few days now. What is sticking in your head?
Well, one more thing I want to make sure we talk about that we haven't mentioned. You mentioned that Dr. Jill Biden, the outgoing First Lady, was at the conference, and so I did get to see her speak. It was very exciting. There was a lot of Secret Service around because she was still the active First Lady at the time. The little fun fact is that the only bathroom in the venue was on the other side of the security checkpoint. So anytime you wanted to go to the bathroom during the whole day of the conference, not just the part where she was there, you had to go through the metal detector both times. But Dr. Biden was there to continue this push by the administration, especially been her focus on really improving the investment in women's health, raising awareness about all of the ways that the healthcare system, as we know, there's just a lot about women's bodies that's not prioritized. There's a lot that's not known. There's a lot of research that's not done on women. There's areas of health that affect women uniquely are just understudied, like endometriosis was brought up a lot. And so Dr. Biden was there to sort of really make the case that, with the help of the Biden administration, she's made some really big government investments in women's health, and she wants the private sector to really match those and, just kind of get it through people's heads that this is 50% of the population. This is a huge addressable market. For some reason, it's just never been taken seriously, especially in the investment world. It's very difficult for first-time female founders who make up a lot of the founders of women's health companies to actually get funded because of the way that investors vet companies. So that was cool. And there was actually a lot of discussion of women's health even outside of Dr. Biden's presentation. There was I attended a panel at a different conference across town, and a lot of folks really getting into more of what she said about what those challenges are and how they could be overcome.
And do keep your eyes peeled, because we will be talking a little bit more about that in the upcoming deep dive later this year. We're looking a lot more about women's health, as you say, because it is such an understudied area, and we are discovering almost every day that something we thought we know about health is not as uniform as we once thought. Everybody reacts in a different way, and thankfully with the data, we're learning more and more about this. So it's exciting to see such a big conference putting so much emphasis on women's health.
Yeah, one fact that I learned is that heart attacks present very differently in women than in men. And the way that it's taught in medical school is that the way that heart attacks tend to present in women is called an atypical presentation. So basically, doctors aren't looking for it, even when the patient is a woman.
I can add to that fun fact. Soap operas tend to show it in the way that it presents in men with the pains down the left arm. And so it went unreported for a long time, where women didn't think they were having heart attacks because they weren't clutching their arms.
Right, exactly. And there's many other examples like that. It's not just a matter of like a women's health investment, period tracking apps or something like that. It's the whole healthcare system has these giant blind spots.
And it's interesting to see those being centered, because over the years, typically when you go to these conferences, the women's health section is far end of the building, right on the last day when everybody's starting to go home or has flights to catch. It's interesting that you say it was peppered throughout and had one of the biggest names on the ballot talking about it.
Yeah, for sure.
What's made you the most hopeful looking forward for the next year? What are you taking away thinking, I feel really good about where this is going?
Lots of things, I think, but just seeing the amount of optimism about the deal-making environment. I mean, optimism doesn't always translate, but, I think things are changing, and folks are kind of excited to see more money flowing into the space, more opportunities for smaller biotechs and smaller pharmas to get licensing deals, to get partnerships, to get acquired, what have you. And then just, it continues to be a really exciting time for the science. There's new advances in especially in neuro and in oncology just every day, all the time. One thing we didn't talk about that is an interesting space that's really gaining a lot of steam is vaccines. I talked to 2 different vaccine companies in my interviews, and you'll see those, really working on not just preventing the next pandemic, but also really trying to improve on the seasonal flu shot, which is actually a pretty bad vaccine in a lot of ways, and trying to improve on preventative health more generally. And that's to connect back to the incoming administration. Robert Kennedy has this "Make America Healthy Again" slogan. It's about, preventative health. It's, he's famously an anti-vaxxer, so it's weird to think that could buoy vaccine companies. But the general idea of, investing in public health in this way, if it turns out to be more than just talking points, it's very exciting. It's, what a lot of people in healthcare have been asking for a long time. And there's reason to believe some things could happen that could be really bad for pharma. We didn't even talk about tariffs, because those are a huge question mark. We'll have to see. There's reason for hope, and you kind of just have to hope for the best.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jonah. Thank you for once again being our ear to the ground at JP Morgan. Thank you all for listening. Join us again soon.
And so that concludes another episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments, at pharmaforum.com/podcasts. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for Pharma Forum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at Pharma Forum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.